So I've been watching, you know, parts of the Hannah Payne citizens or, detainment or citizens arrest case. And with the explanation to the jury on what they need to look for, what they're judging on, what is outside of the scope of judgment, what's inside of the scope of judgment, I have to say that that prosecutor absolutely nailed it. Like, absolutely nailed it. All right, another factor to end up getting said. The prosecutor clarified that somebody wouldn't be looking at the death penalty for a traffic citation. To go ahead and blow holes in that narrative. All right? She clarified the factor that she had tried to blame everyone but herself, had no remorse whatsoever. All right? And thing is, I could imagine with her trying to blame everyone but herself, that ultimately she was trying to muddy the waters as much as possible to try to get the reasonable suspicion pushed onto somebody else. So that way she didn't have to take accountability for, her actions. That being said, when the prosecutor ended up going ahead and clarifying that, first off, they had the weapon. All right. Second off, the weapon got, there was DNA testing done on it, and it actually showed a female's DNA. So if she was trying to go ahead and write the narrative of, she was with somebody else and they were the culprit, it was her DNA on the weapon. Not a male's. It was clarified a female's DNA. All right. The factor, too, that when she was asked if she did it, going to try to brag, she's like, I did it. Like, in other words, like trying to come off as all big and bad. All right. The factor, too, that when the situation happened, there was an officer there that ended up going ahead and catching, the incident on body cam. All right. So the factor that the officer literally had the camera on, there was video to be able to put in, uh, considering the factor that the video was submitted, I'm guessing that the officer would not have been so confident and so smug that, that video would end up going ahead and, locking in a prosecution, a conviction to submit it. Because, remember the whole no video, no case, that whole thing. Well, submit a video. The video may or may not have been altered. Who knows? But considering the factor that it was submitted and it was actually accepted by the court for the trial, that means that they had to have had a forensic auditor go ahead and check over any attempts of, alteration of the video evidence, any, snippets of time, and, any alterations. With all of that, it seems like every basis is covered to even make sure that there's no chance of a mistrial, any chance of, prosecutorial misconduct, And I have to say, too, for anyone that she may have tried to go ahead and defame, to try to make them have to go ahead and get locked up for the crime that she committed. I could imagine that first off, they're probably dealing with some trauma now. Second off, they probably ended up losing a lot of time of their life. All because of the factor of how far she was willing to go. Not to mention that, but I could imagine that once that narrative went out there, people ran with it. People started gossiping, people started making it a public opinion circumstance, started absolutely trash talking and being like, no, I don't think she did it. I think they did it. Not recognizing their personal bias in the situation. And ultimately, I could imagine that they would probably end up being relieved. The factor that it is so, the amount of evidence is so overwhelming to clarify that, she was the guilty party and she acted alone. Even to the point where, people that were direct witnesses all ended up testifying that, it was her. She was the guilty party. And the factor that all of their testimonies lined up, that they actually didn't seem to need to try to coordinate their story or anything like that. The smartest thing she could have done was finally go ahead and enter that guilty plea. Not to mention that, but for anybody that was believing her altered narrative and her law team's altered narrative, to try to get their client off by trying to go ahead and create a narrative of reasonable suspicion around somebody else who was in the general vicinity. Trying to write a narrative to make a convincing pattern of behavior. I would imagine that law team, they're probably going to want to go ahead and start actually submitting apologies to anybody that had been falsely accused, because I could also imagine that anybody that was falsely accused actually can go ahead and start looking at her law team's law firm and start going ahead and attempting to not only get restitutions, but attempt to try to get disbarment for any lawyers that were willing to act in, an unprofessional manner like that.